Okay, can everyone hear me? Thumbs up in the back? Okay, cool. Okay, I'll try and project as much as I possibly can. To start, it's important for me to make very clear that my obsession with stories is a bit abnormal. Since I can remember, I've always been obsessed with stories in any and every form. Whether it's books or movies, television, and even music, I've always been hooked. I'm one of those people who can watch the same thing a million times if I like it. I can watch the same show over and over again, the same movie over and over again, and it takes weeks for me to get bored of any of my favorite songs. In my house, though, I know I can't really get away with it without somebody commenting, "Really, Jeevan, like how many times are you gonna watch the same thing over and over again? The same movie, the same show, over and over and over again." It warrants exasperation, maybe an eye roll, but eventually I'm left to my vices. For me, well, I had won. Because there I would sit, eyes glued to the screen, transfixed by whatever my current obsession was. Yet still, as a child, something was always missing. When I consumed stories, I always craved the ones with people that looked like me. But there weren't many stories out there about little brown girls who loved to read, so instead, I would run away. I'd run to the world of Shakespeare or Hogwarts or Sleepless in Seattle, and honestly, I wanted to live inside those stories forever. In the real world, even though I'm pretty good at acting put together in front of other people, sometimes I feel a sense of confusion when I'm by myself. Almost like I don't know fully where I fit in. But quickly I realized that I could create a little space for myself inside the realm of stories. Whether I see bits and pieces of myself in the supporting character, the not-so-innocent bystander, or yes, even sometimes the villain, I feel like I could live in a little corner of these stories forever, so long as I don't get caught. My experience as a young Punjabi Canadian woman, however, was rarely found. And it affected my self-esteem at times because the uniqueness of my lived experience felt like it began and ended with me. So in case it wasn't clear, I love stories, wholeheartedly and abundantly. I'm a strong believer in the power of words upon our thoughts, emotions, and ultimately our actions. I believe that stories can bring us closer to other people's lived experiences. They can help us understand what people cherish the most, what they detest, and they can help us to see the hardships that people face and the things that make them unique. And this very concept has become a deeply unifying force in my life. So I have a little story, among many stories, to illustrate this sentiment. In my second year of university, which was just last year, stuck on my career path, I found myself experiencing crippling anxiety and loneliness. I remember one day in particular when I suffered from a panic attack. It came unannounced, like they usually do, and then all of a sudden I felt like I was underwater. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find my breath, and before I knew it, there were tears streaming down my face. It wasn't until a little later, after a bit of healing, that I was able to share what was going on with one of my best friends at the time. And at that moment, I felt the knots in my chest begin to unravel. Once I told my own little story, the floodgates had opened around me, and other stories from my friends circled around me, like snowflakes, each one similar, but unlike the next. Telling my story felt cathartic, and I no longer felt a sense of shame for the emotions that I was feeling. I was able to choose how people got to see me and that experience, and for me, that was liberating. So I have a little challenge for all of you. What's something that made you into the individual that you are today? Doesn't have to be anything too big, doesn't have to be any sweeping realization about who you are or what you wanted to do. Usually, it's just the first thing that pops into your head. Furthermore, I want you to think about if you've ever shared that with anyone, or when the last time you shared that with someone was. My challenge for you is pretty simple. The next time you feel like you're in a safe space and you feel supported, share a little story with someone. Because you never know what other stories might come out, and you never know who your words might resonate with. This unifying power of storytelling also extends beyond the individual level well into the global perspective, including the service work that many of us in this room are dedicated to. When I think about global stories, my mind immediately jumps to news media, especially because I want to be a journalist. And this is where my passion lies. Oftentimes, I think we're conditioned to think a certain way, by our exposure to selective storytelling and harmful media framing, especially towards racialized and marginalized communities. These stories and images tend to show individuals in situations that aren't reflective of their complex, multifaceted, and rich lived experience. These patterns include underrepresentation in the media and oftentimes misrepresentation in the media. It includes stories that reinforce harmful stereotypes. While we may think this is the media's problem entirely, it's not entirely wrong. A lot of these themes may be perpetuated in some of the service work we do, especially on the international scale. Sometimes when we want to help people in other countries, while our actions may be driven by kindness and compassion, we may unknowingly reinforce harmful stereotypes regarding the people that we help. When researching for this speech, I came across a blog post from a woman named Lauren Pinkston, who discussed the problematic nature with which she framed her postgraduate volunteer trip to Kenya. When she got back, she wrote a blog post, and now, years later, has come to realize how damaging she described a little boy that she encountered in a village in Kenya. Here, she suggests that the child is completely helpless and emotionless, that only people who love their children put them in baby gap, and that guilt is an appropriate core for serving others. Here, this beautiful little boy, whose experience she wasn't truly able to understand, is reduced down to one small aspect of his existence because of the many stereotypes she believed about living in Africa. In her post, she said something that I thought was worth noting. She said, if the economically poor are our projects and not our friends, it's going to be hard to tell an ethical story. I hope in future endeavors we are able to apply this mentality not just to the economically poor, but to members of indigenous communities, members of racialized communities, of the LGBTQIA+ community, amongst a few. I hope in a time where it can feel like people in certain places are treated like enemies and statistics, we can breathe life and humanity into their stories. This brings me to the place where storytelling and service intersect. I think both of these things emerge from a kind, empathetic, and human place. Service is often motivated by the stories that people tell. I think many of us can attest to that, the stories that compel us to make a difference, because stories motivate change. So when serving the local and the global community, we should make a concerted effort to listen to people's stories from all around the world in order to understand the many realities that they face, to find the commonalities, but also to celebrate difference. We should recognize the power in letting people decide for themselves how the world gets to see them. Through opening our minds to the lived experiences of others, through making space for communities to create their own narratives, and through being self-critical of the stories that we choose to tell, we can change global thought and global action, and ultimately, we can bring people together. In order to put this into action, I believe it is equally important for us to be critical of the stories we consume on a daily basis. Before making any conclusions about an issue you see in the news, especially regarding people in vulnerable communities, I ask you to make an effort to do a few small things. First, ask, who is in control of this story? Who's the author? What publication has funded this story? It's vital to keep in mind that everybody operates from their own viewpoint, and this can shift how stories are presented to the general public. Furthermore, it's important to check if what we're reading is grounded in fact. Are there real people on the ground telling us what's going on? Is there verified, proven evidence to back whatever claims are being made? This provides a whole new perspective on the complexity of any issue at hand. In today's world, we see so many stories just on our cell phones alone. Sometimes we read a headline and believe it to be true before actually looking into where these claims come from. And next, I ask you all to think about who serves to benefit from the narratives being presented to us. Are there corporate or political motives for presenting a group or a community in a specific light? Is there a bad guy and is there a good guy in this story? Why do you think that is? I think having these questions anchored in the back of our minds when we read different stories can help us when consuming, and then ultimately help us figure out where we stand from a more informed and intelligent place. To apply this concept, I want to ask you guys what you think is going on in this picture. What do you guys see? Intimidation. Indoctrination. Any other ideas? A standoff, yeah, awesome. So this picture was taken in 1990 during the highly publicized Oka crisis. So for those of you who don't know, the people of Mohawk in Quebec had been, the Mohawk people in Oka, Quebec, had been fighting the Canadian government since the 18th century for recognition of their sacred land. However, these tensions escalated when the city decided to build a 9-hole golf course on the land, as well as 60 luxury condos. In response, the Mohawk people created a human barricade to stop operations, and after an elongated standoff, the mayor sent in the provincial police force to attack the barricade using tear gas and concussion grenades. In the coverage of the event and the descriptions of this picture, this became the face of that crisis in a lot of Canadian media. And what was interesting was the officer on the left, the white man, was described using words like peacekeeper and baby-faced and innocent, whereas the man with the mask covered because of all the tear gas and everything else that was going on at the time was misidentified as a Mohawk soldier. He was actually an economics student standing there in solidarity, was described as dark and brooding and aggressive. These problematic characterizations take some critical thinking as well as some fact-checking. Sometimes all we see is one picture and our minds instantly take a side. If a story is presented to us and we're able to make a flash judgment about what we think right away, it might be an indication that we don't have all the facts that we need. Just this week, a story of Greta Thunberg, the popular climate activist, was shown at the World Economic Conference in Switzerland with her other youth activist peers. This picture was shown as all of the activists who were involved at that certain event at the World Economic Forum. However, upon looking into it, social media exploded in response to finding out that the brilliant Ugandan youth climate activist Vanessa Nakate was cropped out of the picture and excluded from the coverage of the event. This year is the actual picture. In so many social movements, particularly the climate movement, Black, brown, and Indigenous voices are often excluded from the media coverage. And it's important to ask why only certain activists and certain people occupy the public spaces. At the World Economic Forum as well, 12-year-old youth activist Naomi Wadler explains how it is important for us to be critical of the way we consume media, especially in relation to activism. Okay, well, the video's not working, but that's okay. Basically, she talks about how there are young activists that occupy public spaces. Oftentimes, when we look at climate movements and other social movements, privileged white kids tend to dominate the public spaces that they're in. There are only some kids that get seen as their voices mattering. And in this situation, it's important to think that there are lots of voices out there that are contributing to these movements. And oftentimes, Black, brown, and Indigenous children and individuals, women, and people who are non-gender conforming are the core of a lot of these movements. As an aspiring journalist and writer, it's my dream to create spaces for that same little brown girl who loved to read but couldn't find herself in any of the stories that she loved. For the little Jeevans who can find my story one day and think maybe there are worlds out there to live in where I get to be the main character, where I don't have to hide in the corners of stories and hope to God I don't get caught. So I urge you all to tell little stories that you wish you had heard when you were younger, because it makes the world a softer and more generous place. To end things off, I'll leave you with a quote from one of my favorite authors. She says, "Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize." I hope when given the choice, you all choose to do the latter. Thank you very much.